And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth, but it's not a particularly great day for people who were expecting, hoping for, praying for a quick, decisive, and effective ending to the war with Iran. The headline for the Washington Post this morning, Trump says ceasefire with Iran is over, calling its leaders scum. And they put the word scum in quotation marks. The story, the ceasefire between Iran and the United States is over, President Donald Trump declared today, castigating Tehran after days of escalating attacks and adding later that the U.S. would probably strike Iran again on Wednesday night. Tonight, I think it's over, Trump said about a June ceasefire agreement. He spoke at a meeting of NATO leaders on the morning after U.S. forces launched over 80 strikes on Iran in response to Iranian attacks on ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Hours later, at a news conference, together with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump said the U.S. hit Iran very hard last night and would probably hit them hard again tonight. Now, normally, you wouldn't want to give them that kind of notification, would you? But this is not a normal situation. The president also suggested the U.S. could reimpose a naval blockade on Iran and that the U.S. was not attacking at the highest level, repeating previous threats to strike infrastructure such as bridges, desalination facilities, and electricity plants. In other words, what are usually assumed to be civilian targets. The president spoke after Iran launched heavy retaliation overnight, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps saying it had targeted 85 U.S. military facilities, 85 in Bahrain and Kuwait today. This according to the semi-official media outlet Fars. Now, all of this is going together at the same time that there is encouraging news for Ukraine. And the encouraging news is that the United States would grant Ukraine, this is from a piece from the New York Times, would grant Ukraine a license to manufacture Patriot air defense systems, a move that could significantly bolster Kiev's ability to protect itself against Russian missile attacks that have escalated in recent weeks. Will give them the right to make patriots, Mr. Trump said during a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey. We'll show them how to do it. There is a more of a pro-Ukrainian slant to the president and his comments than most people had expected, particularly when he is meeting together with our Ukrainian allies who generally have been more directly supportive of Ukraine and its struggle for survival and for independence than we have under the last months of the Trump administration here, the most recent months. The president also suggested, aside from the fact that he would be striking infrastructure such as bridges, desalination facilities, and electricity plants, he spoke after Iran launched heavy retaliation overnight, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps saying it had targeted U.S. military facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait. President Trump said, they're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people, and they're vicious, violent people. Trump said that in his comments earlier today. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them. Ouch. They're liars. There's something wrong with them. They're cuckoo. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. Trump said that talks with Iran might continue, but that he was deeply skeptical that they would be productive. So the memorandum of understanding, there's not much understanding behind that memorandum. They can talk, but I think they're wasting their time, said the President of the United States. They're a bunch of lying guys, Trump said. They're bad people. And frankly, I don't want to waste my time with them. Now, I'll let our wonderful negotiators keep talking if they want, but I don't see it. Meanwhile, oil prices had eased but quickly spiked on Wednesday, today. Brent crude futures rose more than 5% to over $78 per barrel on fears that this renewed war could further and would further disrupt energy supplies. The U.S. and Iran had reached a preliminary peace deal last month to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to shipping traffic while continuing to discuss the thornier nuclear issue and possible lifting of U.S. sanctions against Tehran. But the tentative agreement appeared to collapse less than halfway through the 60 days that negotiators had allotted to reach a more durable accord. Trump previously had expressed hope that the negotiations would lead to strict controls on Iran's nuclear program. So what is next? We will be talking about that. President Trump is actually talking about seizing Karg Island and greatly intensifying the war. Someone who has just been traveling around the world, Michael Ruben of the American Enterprise Institute, frequent guest on this show, and specializes in Iran, in Turkey, where the president is right now, and in the Horn of Africa. Michael Ruben will be joining us to try to pierce the veil in terms of what is going to happen next, now that the memorandum of understanding appears to be not only not in effect, but not worthwhile at all. The subsequent negotiations after the memorandum of understanding had stalled, talks began with days of delays before Vice President J.D. Vance flew to Switzerland, remember that, to kick them off, to begin the calls. He wasn't kicking anybody out. But the two sides traded barbs and sporadic strikes from the get-go. And Trump expressed frustration today that Iran's public representation of what was being discussed differed from his understanding. We make a deal. Everyone's agreed. No nuclear weapon. We make a deal. They go outside, joke to the press. They say, we never even talked about it, Trump said. Iran's leaders in recent days have appeared emboldened, with several senior officials appearing in public for the first time since the start of the war as part of the mourning rituals for Khamenei, who was killed in the first hours of the war. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps today described these strikes on the 85 targets as its initial response to the U.S. aggression. More coming up with Michael Ruben of AEI here on the Medved Show. You talk about a little bit of overconfidence, aside from the overconfidence of Iran, with a number of the people coming out of the funeral services for the late supreme leader who was killed by the initial stages of the American and Israeli attack on Iran. There are pledges that any American who tries to seize Karg Island, no one will return alive. They will all be killed. So what does all that mean? The there's a Wall Street Journal editorial which it says no more oil sanctions waiver for Iran, and they point out that the regime lost that privilege by firing on the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, with Iran doesn't make sense if the regime will still carry out regular attacks on commercial ships. Yesterday, President Trump acknowledged the reality by revoking Iran's oil sanctions waiver. Now, all of this is going on while there's another kind of struggle and another kind of overconfidence here in the United States in our domestic politics. There is a story that the Republican Party is preparing $8 million for an ad blitz against the very troubled Democratic candidate, Plattner. And they're preparing it not only against Plattner, but against his replacement. Because Democrats in Maine are scrambling, this according to CNN, to come up with a plan to replace Graham Plattner, their embattled Senate nominee, who is now facing a rape allegation that has left him hemorrhaging support. Plattner has denied the allegation and has not said whether he plans to leave the race. However, the executive director of the Maine Democratic Party sent an email to committee members yesterday indicating the party was meeting with attorneys to determine a potential nominee replacement process. And the CNN reports that Graham Plattner and a small team of strategists behind his candidacy are trying to navigate an exit from the consequential Senate race in Maine. It's consequential because it could determine which party controls a majority in the U.S. Senate. Without entirely squandering the movement that Plattner has built. Some movement. I mean, it's a little bit too early and a little bit too tenuous, it seems to me, to talk about a movement. Do you think anyone is going to remember Graham Plattner 2 years from now, say, or even a month from now? In any event, people familiar with the matter said that rather than digging in or trying to find a path forward for his candidacy, the party should be working and is working on trying to figure out who is going to replace him as the Democratic nominee to run against Republican Susan Collins, who's been there for 6 terms. Wow. Okay. Plattner is expected to announce his decision through a recorded video, which is expected later today. We will obviously be waiting for that, as everybody else is. As of this morning, the message had not been taped. People familiar with the situation said support for Maine's Democratic nominee in the Senate race collapsed this week after a woman he previously dated alleged in very graphic and disgusting detail that he raped her when he was drunk in 2021. He's denied all charges. After CNN and Politico reported the allegations, which Plattner called troubling, serious, and false, the nominee said he would reflect on the best path forward, whatever that means, for his Senate bid. The best path forward is not a path forward, it's a path backward. Morris Katz, who we played some tape of yesterday on the show, he is a top campaign strategist for Plattner, is set to meet with the embattled candidate today. Katz, who is also a key advisor to New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani, another Democratic socialist, has told associates he does not believe Plattner can remain in the race given the allegations against him. This could and should end today. A person close to the campaign told CNN, "We'll see if it does." The Maine Democratic Party pointedly said yesterday night that the Plattner campaign should have no role in determining our next Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, nor in determining what this process looks like. We have a very short window, said a voter from Kennebunkport, Maine. We have a very short window to pull ourselves together and find somebody. And I'm just praying to the universe, to the stars, that we can pull it together. That is Nancy, who is a voter from Kennebunkport, Maine, who voted for Governor Janet Mills in the Democratic primary. She is the sitting governor, who is in her 80s and late 70s, actually. Let me be accurate on that. She is lost the Democratic primary to Graham Plattner. Adam Green, who is the co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which endorsed Plattner, but has since called on the nominee to drop out, sharply criticized the state party over its Tuesday rebuke of Plattner. Green said in an interview with CBS News earlier today that Plattner would have exited the race already if not for the incompetence and arrogance of the state party. He urged party officials to share their plan for replacing Plattner immediately. It's reasonable for Graham Plattner, as his last act, though even nobody wants him around anymore, to say, I'm willing to leave, just assure the public that they have a voice, said Green. And that has not happened yet. The Maine Democratic Party needs to get their act together. Well, their act could hardly be further apart. We have days, not weeks, to make sure a real progressive is on the ballot, said Joseph Gevarkesi, the group's executive director, in a statement. If we do not organize now, we risk watching the Democratic establishment hand Maine a corporate placeholder while the party that just got outvoted decides it knows better. The coming decisions, we will get to those. We will also be speaking coming up to Michael Ruben of American Enterprise Institute on what next in Ukraine and Iran. And it is always a pleasure to welcome back to the show Michael Ruben, who is Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum. He specializes in Iran, Turkey, and the Horn of Africa, and his career has included time as a Pentagon official with field experiences in Iran, Yemen, and Iraq, as well as engagements with the Taliban. That's prior to 9/11. Mr. Ruben has also contributed to military education, teaching U.S. Navy and Marine units about regional conflicts and terrorism. His scholarly work includes several key publications, including Dancing with the Devil and Eternal Iran. Dr. Ruben, the President of the United States said today, no more ceasefire. The ceasefire is dead. And he very specifically called the current leadership of Iran scum and indicated there may be, within the next 24 hours, major new attacks by the American military against targets in Iran. Do you think those attacks are going to be as devastating as President Trump has promised, indicated?
Well, Michael, first of all, as of July 1st, I'm exclusively now at the Middle East Forum. Unfortunately, the American Enterprise Institute more or less did away with their Middle East program. That said, in answer to your question, the problem is that Donald Trump oftentimes says a lot of things and changes his mind. That said, showing a willingness to walk away from the Memorandum of Understanding makes perfect sense. I've actually sat down and talked to the Iranians before, and the way I have always described Donald Trump is he's much more willing to talk to the Iranians directly, but at the same time, he's much more willing than any of his predecessors to walk away from these talks. He's not going to get dragged down or bogged down in the typical Iranian strategy of simply trying to run down the clock or engage without ever coming to a fruition. The Iranians tested Donald Trump's red lines, and instead of Donald Trump playing the Obama or Biden game, Donald Trump simply said, I'm walking away.
So the walking away, does that include, he has mentioned specifically the prospect of seizing Karg Island, which is a fairly important strategic staging ground for the Iranian regime. The Iranians, a spokesperson, suggested this morning that not a single American soldier would survive if they attack Karg Island. Do you think that is a likely target in the next 48, 72 hours?
Well, the problem with Karg Island is that it's very flat, and it's about maybe 10 miles off the coast of Iran, but not far inland are a bunch of mountains. So what the Iranians would presumably try to do is fire a number of drones and missiles trying to overwhelm any American forces which landed at Karg. The question is whether the American military has the capacity in order to counter those drones and ballistic missiles. I believe they do. That said, a better target may be Keshima Island, which is further south. The reason why Keshima Island is so important is that's where a lot of the Iranian military small boats are launched, from which they harass the shipping. That said, look, if I had to give advice to Donald Trump, Michael, I would say don't go after the military targets so much. Go after the leadership. The problem with Mohammed Bakr Kalibaf, with whom we've been negotiating, is that he doesn't control things. He's probably the fifth most powerful person inside Iran right now. And then you actually have two choices. You can either eliminate everyone else who competes with him, or you can negotiate with the people who are actually in charge if they want to negotiate. That would probably be the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps chief, Ahmed Vahidi. You might actually need to then start going down a list saying, we're going to negotiate with you, but if you don't negotiate, we're going to kill you. And after person 1, person 2, and person 3, maybe by the time we get to person 4, they start to reconsider their willingness to take on the Americans.
Okay, with all that going on, they have just had these huge funerals, services, the honors for Khamenei, the previous supreme leader. And the crowds were chanting for revenge. Should that be taken seriously? Because it appeared to be very much the national sentiment that they weren't angry at their own leadership. They were angry and indignant at Donald Trump and the United States of America.
Well, I'll push back a little bit on this, Michael. First of all, those who are going to the funeral are those who are being bussed in. State workers, Iraqis, Hezbollah, and so forth, as well as some genuine supporters. But the genuine supporters are probably in the minority there. What's actually interesting is the Iranians invited more than 100 different countries to send delegations to the funeral. And very few of them did. The only people to send heads of state were Iraq, Armenia, and I believe Pakistan. Even the Pope, who has spoken against the war in Iran, refused to, obviously the Pope's not going to go, but he refused to send any representative. China and Russia sent very low-ranking people. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain didn't send anyone. That's an embarrassment. The other thing which is an embarrassment is the Iranians were trolling many of the delegations and many of the individuals by the Quranic verses they were chosen to recite. So, for example, for Ayatollah Khomeini's grandchildren, they recited one about one verse about how you shouldn't just sit at home and grow fat and lazy, grow rich. And when they realized what the Quranic verse was chosen for them, they actually all got up and left. Above Khomeini's coffin was an Arabic verse from the Quran, which talked about an uprising, a revenge. And in this case, what it was a verse which Ayatollah Khomeini had cited in order to urge Hezbollah, Hamas, and other groups to terrorism back in the 1980s. And so what I would be very worried about this, and the hand-picked Western press who went didn't pick up on this, is that the Iranians were very much suggesting that they're going to respond not militarily directly against the United States, but via the terrorist groups, much like they did in the 1980s.
Which is sobering thought, too, when you're talking about revenge. Meanwhile, the other part of the world where there was supposed to be an end to the war literally months ago, but there's no end to the war, is the struggle for Ukraine to survive from the invasion that is now, 3 years in the past. Said long in the past with unspeakable casualties. So what about the pledge by President Trump to provide Patriot anti-missile defense forces for the Ukrainians? Is that a significant break and move forward in our relationships with the Ukraine? We will get to that and to more with the one and only Michael Ruben, and speaking with some knowledge, having recently been traveling in Ukraine. We will be right back.
Listeners love Michael Medved.
I listen to you occasionally when I'm driving. It turns my stomach every time I do.
Lately, you've been sounding like a raving lunatic. You upset me so much. You never tell the truth.
I truly believe you're delusional.
You don't have a clue.
You're wrong again.
What's going on in your head?
You are no good for the country.
People like you who are a monster. Have you no shame?
The Michael Medved Show. The Michael Medved Show.
Listen.
Nationwide.
Listen.
And around the world at michaelmedved.com.
And listen.
And it is a pleasure to welcome back to continue the conversation with Michael Ruben, who is Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum, which is one of the major sources of information and analysis concerning the situation in the Middle East and also the situation in Crimea and Ukraine and Russia right now. The news today is that the U.S. and the defense establishment in the U.S. have granted a license to Ukraine to manufacture Patriot air defense systems, a move that could significantly bolster, says the New York Times, Kyiv's ability to protect itself against Russian missile attacks that have escalated in recent weeks. Is this a move that will benefit the Ukrainian struggle directly?
You know, Michael, I would say it's not only going to benefit the Ukrainian struggle. As the United States faces shortages of weaponry, it's going to benefit the United States as well. When I was in Ukraine last month, I was spending most of my time out towards the front in places like Kharkiv and Dnipro and Zaporizhia. But in Kyiv, the capital, I went to a secret drone factory. Can't say exactly where it is. They're producing several drones per minute now. Now, just 3 years ago, they were building drones in garages or having to import them. Now they're drones which they are upgrading in the assembly line up to 500 times a year, are top-notch, probably the best in the world. When it comes to that sort of military defense infrastructure, they may be what we need. And I'd actually go further. Look, you know that there's a NATO summit going on in Ankara, Turkey right now. Having been in Europe before, having seen the various militaries, I would argue that at this point in time, NATO needs the Ukrainians more than the Ukrainians need NATO, because with the exception of Ukraine, which is outside of NATO, and Poland, which is in, I'm not sure whether any of the European components of NATO can fight anymore. If the Ukrainians wanted to, if Russia disappeared was not an issue, and if the Ukrainians wanted to march to Paris, I'm not sure any of the militaries between them and France could actually stop them.
which is an alarming thought. And now, did I hear correctly that the Ukrainians had hit some Russian targets in Siberia recently?
You know, Michael, it's a great question. It's quite possible that Ukraine did hit Russia in Siberia, but what we've seen in previous attacks, while many of the Ukrainian drones are short range, what the Ukrainians have become quite adept at is infiltrating Russia. And some Russians are sympathetic to them, some Russians are just corrupt. And so they're able to send their drones via lorries to assemble them elsewhere so that they are within range of some of the sites in Siberia. What the Russians have really learned is that no place is safe right now. And when we actually see some of the momentum shifting in Ukraine's case, in Ukraine's favor, it really does answer the question which we saw during the Biden administration, where Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, wanted to contain the Ukrainian war inside Ukrainian territory, but that's not how you end the war. You end the war by showing Russians that they're not winning the war. So, yeah. And then when it comes to how Trump should handle Erdogan, Trump's logic is this, that number one, Erdogan is transactional. And number two, if he defers to Erdogan, Erdogan can keep order in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, I'm not sure whether either of those assumptions are true. While Trump sees Erdogan as transactional, there is an ideology underpinning Erdogan, and that ideology is very hostile to the United States. Also, the problem with transactionalism is someone like the Russians can always outbid you. The other problem is that Erdogan isn't as strong as perhaps he thinks. His economy is in the toilet, and you don't have to go around arresting all the opposition figures if you're not really afraid of the opposition figures. The fact of the matter is Erdogan's in poor health, and some of this bluster may be an artificial show of strength.
What about Vladimir Putin? Is he being shaken by some of this unexpected energy and force on the Ukrainian side?
You know, here's the thing about Putin. I really do think that Vladimir Putin is shaken. Unfortunately, I don't think that Trump fully understands the extent to which the Russians are shaken. One of the things that most surprised me, Michael, during my trip to Ukraine was in Kyiv when I was meeting someone from the president's office. And they said, as you know, Steve Witkoff is the envoy negotiating alongside Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, on a lot of these hot-button issues. Did you know that Kushner and Witkoff have been to Moscow at least 7 times, but they've actually never been to Ukraine, to Kyiv? And the thing is, when you actually go to Ukraine, you can see that spirit de corps among all Ukrainians. It actually reminds me a lot of Israel. And when you're in Russia, the Russians, this war is increasingly unpopular among Russians. I mean, the Ukrainians are losing every month more than they lost in the entirety of the Afghan conflict. And so if Witkoff, if Kushner actually went to Ukraine, they might actually see just how much and how clear it is that the Ukrainians are going to come out on top come hell or high water.
And let us hope that your optimism, and it is optimistic, is very well grounded, as I am sure it is. It could be one of the truly great developments of our time to see Ukraine actually winning this war. And when you look at the estimates that they have of over 1 million Russian casualties, that's with killed and wounded, it's not inconceivable at all. You can read, by the way, Michael Ruben's most recent columns, contributions. They're linked at our website at michaelmedved.com. And there's this story about the current situation facing the United States and our confrontation, the broken ceasefire with Iran. A Mediaite is reporting that a senior Iranian lawmaker warned President Donald Trump that not a single American soldier will return alive if there was any U.S. attempt to seize or invade the country's vital Karg Island oil hub after the president suggested a takeover. The threat came after remarks made by Trump at the NATO summit in Turkey following an exchange of strikes between the countries last night that prompted the president to brand the ceasefire deal with Tehran over. President Trump revealed that as part of Tuesday night's strikes, the U.S. struck part of Karg Island and suggested further military action remained on the table. We attacked Karg Island last night, knocked out a piece, President Trump said. Don't touch the oil, because maybe we'll take over Karg Island, he added. I said, don't hit the pipes, President Trump said, just hit everything else. And they hit. They may hit again tonight. Again, trying to get their attention, I think. Ibrahim Razi'i, a spokesperson for the Iranian Parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Committee, responded directly to Trump on X, writing a translation to English provided by X, come, we are waiting for you, and we promise that not a single American soldier will return alive. I am not sure that is a way to get President Trump to step down. Professor Robert Pape, who's been a guest on this show, says Trump is playing with nationalist fire by striking civilian targets in Iran, with millions demanding revenge at the supreme leader's funeral. Trump just handed the regime a clear trigger for major retaliation. The entire world economy is now at risk. Let us hope that those risks do not deliver to any tragic extent or deeply damaging extent for the United States, which is playing the role and the role we must play as, in our second 250 years of this greatest nation on God's green earth.